Oh, no, not yet.
I sort of put it aside, and then 6 months later, she was dead. The cancer had come back just a couple months earlier. And I was a mess, and I forgot about the book. But she did not forget about the book, because I would hear her voice often. And one of the things I would hear her say most often was, well, you wouldn't have to worry about that if you'd write the damn book. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. And it took me 3 years to get to the point where I got serious about writing. And I took classes, and I did all kinds of stuff. And I started a website and a blog, and I met with people, and I worked hard. And in 2013, the first in a series of little books about people grieving the death of a friend came out. This is one of them. It's called Friend, Grief, and Men, Defying Stereotypes. And along the way of working on the book, I decided to turn it into 6 little books, because they're all different situations. So the first one is just about being angry that your friend has died and people don't understand the depths of your grief. The next book was about grieving friends lost to AIDS. I worked in the AIDS community. I've been in and out since almost the beginning of the epidemic. So I had a lot of experience with that. The next one was about losing friends on 9/11. And the one after that was losing friends in the military. And then after that was losing friends you work with. And it was a very loose definition of workplace, because I had professional baseball players, and I had people who worked in offices of people who performed on Broadway, and just, a whole mix of people. And the final book was this one, the one about men, because I think, like a lot of people, I went into researching and interviewing people with the idea that it would be really difficult to get men to talk about their friends. And so the first interview I did was in a sports bar with a guy whose best friend had died. They were both sports reporters here in Chicago. And I thought, well, maybe he'll answer a few questions. And I had a long list of questions. And an hour and a half later, we were on question number 3. And what I found was that not just with men, but always with men, it was a matter of someone was willing to listen to them without judgment. I have 2 degrees in theater. I'm not a therapist. I'm just there to listen. I'm not there to diagnose them. And many of them had never talked about their friends before, and the impact of those friendships and the loss of their friendships on their own lives. So when people would say to me I told them I was working on these books, they were like, oh, that's so depressing. I'm like, it's not depressing. I said, it's sad, because people have lost someone who meant the world to them. But there's a lot of laughing in it. There's a lot of humor. There's also a lot of inspiration, because almost every person in every one of my books changed their lives because of their friends.
Yes.
Sometimes in really dramatic ways. And I was interviewed a couple years ago, and the podcaster said, you had to write those books to write your new book. Well, the last book I wrote was about the contributions of straight women in the AIDS community. And it took me a while to realize that book was about grief too. Mm-hmm. And not just my own from friends I lost, but a woman who went to college with, and her group was her and 6 gay men. And by 2001, they had all died from AIDS. And her entire social group was gone. And That was a 3-hour interview. We went through a lot of Kleenex. But the number one thing I have found is that people cherish their friendships and they are devastated when those friendships end. And they welcome the opportunity to let people know that. No. So now I'm working on a book that I really resisted writing. And it's a return to the Friend Grief series, but it won't be a little book, it'll be a full-length book about grieving friends who died during COVID.
Yes.
Not just from COVID, because the restrictions we have felt applied to anyone who was dying. There have always been issues about access for friends, even more so during COVID. One of my oldest and dearest friends died in February, not from COVID, but the hospital she was at only allowed 2 visitors total, 2 people, not 2 visitors at a time, but she had to designate 2 people. They were the only ones who could visit her, one of her brothers and her sister. And my husband kept saying, do you want to go see her? And I said, I can't go see her. The other people in her family couldn't even go see her. So, I had no rights to that. And I had not felt that since the early days of the AIDS epidemic. But there are a lot of similarities between that and COVID, and how it was handled. Pardon me?
You're not allowed to send a card or a letter or anything like that, or was she on the ventilator?
Was she what?
Was she on the ventilator?
No, she did not have COVID. She had melanoma, and
so you weren't allowed to send her cards or
no,
letters?
they only allowed 2 people per patient.
No, but because you knew you can't go in, could you still not send cards and letters or nothing like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I could call her. I could send her cards. I'd send her cookies.
Oh,
That part was fine,
yeah.
but it was the inability even for her other brother to come visit her, much less me.
Yeah.
After she died, I was asked to give the eulogy. And I had never given a eulogy before. I'd spoken graveside when my parents died, but not a formal in church, standing 10 feet away from the casket eulogy. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I almost didn't do it, but she would have been really upset if I hadn't done it.
Yeah.
But it was, it was very difficult. But I think that, the fact that the 2 people who spoke at her funeral, me and the priest, who I had known her since freshman year of high school, he met her senior year of college. We had both known her for so long. And, unfortunately, a lot of funerals, you don't hear from people who actually knew the person who died. So that was kind of wonderful, that we were able to share stories about her. But like I said, I was not a writer. And this is my 4th career, actually. And I never expected to be doing this. But it's amazing how writing about grief, I'm not saying it makes you an expert, because no one's an expert except on their own grief. But people see you as someone they can talk to about it, about their own grief, who they can tell stories to, who they can feel safe with, because that's the number one thing that holds people back, is that they don't feel safe talking about their grief.
And that's why there's so many issues of, um, especially men who are afraid to talk about it. So it's so much easier for them just to stuff it and keep it inside instead of,
Well, exactly.
and
Well, and we have these roles that we impose on people, and men have, traditionally had this role of they're the strong ones, they hold up everybody else, and which is unfair to them. It's unfair to anyone who has that imposed on them. So when I did that first interview with that guy, I thought, well, he's an exception. He's a sports reporter. He talks all the time. And then the next interview I did with a man was 3 hours long. And over time, it turned out the shortest interview was an hour and a half because these were men talking about friends who changed their lives.
yes,
Their friendship changed their lives. Their death made them examine their own mortality and make changes to their lives. And many of them had never talked about it before because I don't know why. I mean, maybe they couldn't find someone who was willing to listen
yes,
and who's not going to tell them how they should feel. I'm just there to listen when I interview people. That's all I want to hear your story. I want to tell it in an honest, sensitive way so that when people read my books, they will know you and your friend.
yes.
And I want to honor that friendship. And it was, you know, it was a surprise to me that men were that willing to talk. Um, it's still a little bit of a surprise to me,
Because
but
they found someone that they really didn't know, but in the sense trusted, so they released it. They
oh,
released that,
definitely,
you know?
definitely.
So,
Um, the former police superintendent here in Chicago worked for New York Police Department on 9/11. And he was with Rudy Giuliani that day and almost got crushed when the South Tower fell. And he's famous for not talking about that. Every year on the anniversary, the media would approach him and he'd like, not talking about it. So my husband knew him through his job and asked him if he would be willing to talk to me. And, as a courtesy to my husband, I'm sure he agreed. So I went to police headquarters and I said, I know you don't like talking about this. So we can just talk about how police departments handle line of duty deaths, you know. And he talked about that for maybe 5 minutes. And then he opened up the drawer of his desk and he pulled out a stack of Holy Mass cards from funerals. And he said, I only have 22 because there were two funerals at the same time. And he starts peeling them off like playing cards and telling me about each police officer who died that day. And I was like, whoa. And after 45 minutes, his aide said, we have to wrap this up. And he said, yeah, sure. Come back if you want to. We'll talk some more. And I did. No one in the police department believed that he talked to me until the book came out.
wow.
Because, and I don't know. And again, I wasn't a reporter writing a story for the anniversary. I wanted to talk about how it affected him to lose men in his command, on that day while dealing with his own
Yeah,
trauma.
yeah. Yeah, because that would have been trauma. So probably PTSD was probably also a part of it. So think,
Oh, I'm sure it is, and it is for a lot of people that I've talked to.
yes. So
Um,
I remember, I'm gonna share this with you real quick. Because just hearing what you're talking about and how you're listening stories from men and how they're finally deciding to open up and talk about it. And I hope by the time they were done, or you were done with them, that they felt better releasing it. You know,
Mhm.
I remember, I think it was 2005 or 2006 when a friend of mine died in a car accident,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
I didn't know about it um, till all of a sudden I got a phone call from her friend Carol, and I just went into shock. And then Maury called me because Maury didn't know that I had just found out about it. And at least Maury did stop and listen because she was a social worker that worked in the mental health.
Mhm.
And I went into shock. And then I had this thing that I had to go find the spot where the
Mhm.
accident happened. And once I found it, it to me, I don't know why I had to go to that spot, you know, and
Mhm.
because what happened is she lost control of the car, or the sun was in her light, and she ended up on the wrong side of the road, and her car flipped and threw
Oh,
her out of the car and broke her neck.
oh, oh.
And, but it was how each one of us, as her friends, respected to be there, but her mother was like either in a total shock, but she wouldn't have a funeral. She just
Oh.
didn't have a funeral. So we had to create our own memorial for her. And we invited her to come, but she didn't come. But
Mhm.
I wanted to be there for her mom, but her mom was like pushing people away. Because
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't know if it's because her mom did not know how to grieve or she was in shock or whatever, but it was really hard for me to imagine why this person who was gone through so much, but yet she had so many good goals, and suddenly she's gone.
Mhm.
I mean, gone. I never saw her again, not a viewing,
Mhm.
nothing. She went from the morgue to the cremation, and that was it. And I know I've had different friends who passed away, good, close friends, some that I couldn't even make it to the funeral. And I think at that time it was sort of, in a sense, hard even for me to talk about it.
Mhm. Well, it's such a, I think another complicating thing of our world right now, the last 10 years or so, is that I have a lot of friends, some of whom I know in person, some of whom I only know online.
Right,
And they're scattered all over the country.
right,
They're in Ireland, they're in England, they're in Switzerland, they're in Canada, they're in different places. My husband doesn't know them. So, how would they find out that I died if he doesn't know them? It's, I've had those instances where I found out months after that someone had died. And I thought, why didn't they tell me? It's like, because the family didn't know that we were friends.
but you know what? That's the funny thing that you would say that, because I remember a couple years ago I went to say, I remember Angie's birthday. This is a different friend. This was a friend that
Mhm.
actually was my son's godmother. I
Mhm.
remember going online on Facebook to go wish her a happy birthday because it was her birthday. And that's
Mhm.
when I found out on a post on her page that she
Mhm.
had died in April,
Wow.
almost
Yeah.
5 or 6 months
Mhm.
sooner. And I never was, nobody called me, nobody wrote to me, nobody said anything
Mhm.
to me. I had just suddenly found out on Facebook that my one of my closest friends died,
Yeah.
and it
It's so jarring.
And to this day, I just like, and I miss talking to her. I miss doing things with her. We were church buddies. We went out and did things together, and we learned from each other. And her parents took me in when I became homeless, and I worked at they were Indians. They were from India, and I worked at the deli, and she taught me how to to make the samosas and the
Um,
curry and the beef curry and all that stuff. And then she would also have me do things that she refused to do, and I'm like, come on, Ruth. And then and then I heard she had cancer, and then she died, and nobody told me she died. I don't know. In fact, if I had not even called Angie to tell Angie something, I would have never known that her father just died that same
mhm.
day.
Yeah,
She wasn't
yeah.
in, and it's funny how some people, I get what you're saying is, because me too, I have more friends and supporting friends online than I do out, offline. And I too wonder how, if God forbid anything happens to any of us, how they're going to find out, because it's, eh, all I have to say is the worst thing is to find out somebody that you're very good friends with, to find out on Facebook that they died, you know?
Mhm.
I found out my dad died on Facebook too.
Oh my God.
Nobody called, nobody emailed, nobody texted to
Mhm.
say, hey, Daddy just passed away. Why did I have to find out on Facebook? And the worst part is then I found out they actually emailed us originally, but I never saw the email. Why would you
Mhm.
email me to tell me that Daddy died? Why couldn't you pick
No
up the
kidding.
phone?
No
You know?
kidding.
Yeah, so it's
You
just,
know, one of the, like I said, I was been in and out of the AIDS community since
oh,
almost
yes.
the beginning. And those of us who've been around that long um, talk a lot about the effects that it has on us. And that, I felt it a lot the beginning of COVID. Because there were so many similarities, but I realized maybe 5 or so years ago what my trauma response is from those days. And it's that if I don't hear from my friends for a while, I assume they're dead,
Oh,
because back in those days, people disappeared.
yes.
They disappeared suddenly. You didn't hear about them. No one spoke to them. And the next thing you heard was when you read their obituary in the gay paper that week. And so I actually asked a bunch of my friends. My friends are so tolerant of me. I actually asked some of them, would you tell me if you were sick, like really sick?
Yeah.
And some said yes, and some said no. And my friend who died in February was one of the ones who said no. Now, that did not surprise me because she was very private,
Yeah.
very private. She knew everything that everybody else was doing, but she was very private about herself.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a big surprise to me when the last year and certainly the last 3 or 4 months of her life, she told me details of what she was going through, more than she told anybody else outside the family, as far as I can tell, because I talked. I was in contact with one of our mutual friends for a long, during this time, and it became clear that she didn't know as much as I did. And I wasn't going to say, "Why are you telling me all this stuff? You told me you weren't going to tell me." Um, Maybe it was she knew it was important to me, or maybe she just needed someone
To tell.
she could say, "I'm really down.
Hmm.
I'm really depressed."
You,
You
you
know,
were her trusted friend.
and it was, she was very special. She was one of those rare people you never ever heard a negative thing, a comment about. So I felt very honored.
Yes.
And, in the end, that's why I agreed to do her eulogy.
Yes. Can I ask you? because you say you wrote from the AIDS community from what, since the early '80s or whatever.
Yeah.
When you knew they all was suddenly passing away, did you feel that you were immune to the death, or did each one of the deaths affect you?
It, I came across something when I was working on the book about losing friends in the military,
Yeah.
and it's a concept called moral injury, and it's related to PTSD. There's some overlap, but it's not exactly the same thing. And the hallmarks of moral injury are unresolved grief and
Yeah.
survivor guilt, which explains everyone I know who's still around from those days. And just like the military, those of us who were in the AIDS community then were hit with so many deaths. You
Yeah.
know, I know people who went to multiple funerals a week. Um, I know I have a friend who lost 400 friends and acquaintances over time, and you did not have the luxury of grieving one person before the next one died. And that's very similar to being in war. You know, if someone's killed next to you on the battlefield, you can't call a timeout. And you just have to push that aside until later. The problem is that for many people, later doesn't come until years or even decades later, because grief always comes back, whether you want it to or not. You can push it away, but it never stays away. And it was just when it hits you, it's so overwhelming, in part because you thought you were dealing with it then, but you really weren't. You couldn't. It wasn't humanly possible.
But in a sense, when you come to think about it, even as even as a friend or and an advocate on their behalf, you were still dealing with anticipatory grief because you knew that the ending that they would not survive this virus, you know.
Right.
And
Well, but even when, like in the first 15 years of the AIDS epidemic, and there were no effective drugs.
right,
So you knew that the likelihood of people dying was very high.
yes,
And, you know, but even then, it didn't make it easier.
no,
It did not make it easier at all, because partly because you knew what was going to happen to them. You knew how much they were going to suffer.
yes. And yet you also had to know that the people around them was going to also go through that too.
Mhm.
Because I think, in a sense, it's because of us being so human, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's just that's how our emotions work. Is that it affects all of us, every one of us, whether we have the virus or not. It still, in a sense, affects all of us,
Mhm.
and somehow internally, you still grieve for that person, even if you know there's going to be somebody next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, when COVID started,
Uh,
I started having these weird flashbacks to the beginning of the AIDS epidemic.
like
And of course,
PTSD.
not it wasn't like that so much as it was like I would see these photos of medical people like in spacesuits. They're completely
Okay.
covered up, and I'd look at the picture. I go, "What year is that?" And thinking that that was a picture from 1983, not 2020.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't that I was upset. It wasn't that I was grieving. It was just like these flashes of memory. And of course, I thought I was the only person going through this. I was not. A lot of my friends were going through the same thing. And it was, it's not a perfect comparison, obviously,
Right.
two different viruses. But it was enough that um,
To scare
it
you.
made us realize that we had to talk about it. We had to
Yes.
talk about what we went through then,
Yes.
because a lot of people were, much more so than I, a lot of people that I knew were really suffering because it was all coming back to them. And so I got involved in a number of online writing groups, and it was very cathartic, and it was very supportive, very, very, very safe places to share what you were going through. And the way we did it was through writing.
Like journaling. Yes.
So it was very, very valuable.
Yes.
It still is, to be honest.
So it was your grief and your emotions going down and putting it in ink. That way
Mhm.
you were expressing yourself as it was by expressing yourself it was helping.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was, but I'll tell you, it's very intense
Yes.
and very intense. And, you know, I would be in the middle of these, you know, workshops or whatever, and I'd be like, I don't know how much more of this I can listen to. And I've had those thoughts too, working on this new book. Um, some of the research that I've done, it's like, oh man, I don't know how I can handle this. So, but I learned a long time ago, I have to find ways to protect myself, my mental health while I'm working on this stuff.
Mm.
Thank God I'm in therapy while I'm working on this book. I was already in therapy. It was like, thank God, and she's a grief specialist.
Oh.
Um, I lucked out with her, believe me.
Yes.
But,
Yes. Yes.
I was not in therapy when I was writing my other books, and I wish I had been, because a couple of them really took a toll on me
Yes.
emotionally, really took a toll. And I would have benefited from having that kind of um, objective, safe person to talk to.
Yes. That's true.
So I don't,
And it's
my
and it's
therapist said, you write about really serious stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm not sure why.
and we don't think about it until afterwards, and
Mhm.
why it's affecting us, but still it's the afterwards. So.
It's hard to, I'm humbled by the stories people tell me
Mhm.
when I interview them, but I have to recuperate afterwards,
Yes.
because it's very easy to absorb the emotions in their stories. And while that is good in many ways for telling their stories, I can't let it get too far,
Right.
or it's bad for me
Exactly.
personally.
So that's why you had your therapist as your shield.
Well, she's been my therapist for 3 years almost. And so, and we even, this new book, we discussed it for a few months. And because I was really resistant to the idea. And she kept saying, why don't you want to do this book? You've written on this topic before. And I said, because I know where it has taken me in the
Yeah.
past, and I don't want to go there again.
Right.
And she said, were you in therapy then? I'm like, no. She said, well, you are now. And frankly, I would not even consider writing this book without being in therapy.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do it.
So when you say you're taking a break, you take a break between writing it before it's published or after it's published.
I'm sorry, what?
So when you say you had to take a break, do you take the break after you write the story or after the book is published?
All of the above. I take breaks, when I interview people. Um, I don't interview like multiple people a day, especially on this new book, because COVID is still fresh, it's still happening,
Yes.
which makes it more intense than the other books.
Yes.
Um, so I don't make plans for after I do an interview because I want to, partly because I don't know how long it'll last, but also because I want to be able to decompress,
Yes.
to think about what I have just heard, although I'm recording it and I'm taking notes, but I still need to sort of sit with it a little bit and sort of let it kind of seep out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I send the book to my editor, I feel like, okay, I can breathe now.
Okay. Yeah.
Even though there's still a lot of work to do when they send it back, when he sends it back to me. But I feel like that's the first time I can really breathe. And then once it's ready for publication, then it's like, oh, thank God it's done. And, but then I talk about it for a long time, the
Because
book
it
about
becomes
strength,
because
and
it
it's,
becomes part of you.
yeah, it does. It really does. And it's, oh, it's the grief lady. I'm like, no, I'm not the grief lady. But but I do talk about it. And, the first books in this series are 9 years old now. The book about straight women in the AIDS community is 3 years old. And I'm still talking about all of them
Mm-hmm.
because they're really sort of evergreen topics. It's, And the interesting thing in the last 6 months is that in the Friend Grief series, the book that's the most popular is the first one about anger,
Yes.
because anger is a part of grief that a lot of people don't acknowledge or talk about.
Yes. And I always tell people it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to be angry at God because it's not a sin. It's what you do with that anger that becomes a sin.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So either you're going to go and harm and hurt someone, or you're going to take that anger and turn around and do something good with it. You know?
But I think that people shy away from admitting that they're angry
Yes.
because it's seen as a negative emotion. Um, but it's only negative, as you said, what you do with it.
Right.
And and because we have these preconceived ideas about how people should grieve, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people feel very comfortable telling other people how to grieve.
Yes.
And anger is usually not part of their recommendation.
Yeah. I do teach it in my class how to become an effective comforter. And
Mhm.
it's okay to allow the griever to be angry because it's not only part of that grief process, but it's part of the emotional process as well. It's part of your emotions. And it most time by releasing that anger also helps you to breathe better. It
Oh,
really,
and I think that, anger is a very justified emotion when you're grieving.
yes,
You're angry because someone died or how they died. And why wouldn't you be?
yes, exactly.
Why wouldn't you be? So to gloss over it, just like pushing away grief entirely, is ultimately bad for you because it will come back. It will come back when you least expect it.
Yes, yes, I have to agree with that. Wow. So you said at the Global Grief Conference you're going to be with Marty?
I am. Marty and I met um, 5 years ago, I think, at one of her show and tales events in Brooklyn. I was in New York, and and we became friends. And we've done a few events for Let's Reimagine
Yes.
uh, group, and we work really well together. And she really identifies with the whole idea my books about grieving your friends. She has lost 24 friends and family members since COVID started. And, and she will be in the new book too. But we work really well together, kind of
That's
tag
good.
team.
That's
So
good.
I always look forward to doing something with her because I hesitate to say we have a good time
Yes.
because we're talking about grief, but we have a good time because we're on the same wavelength,
Yes.
and we just the way we talk about grief is very similar.
You're you're not insulting the emotion of it, and you're not taking. Um, I had the right word a few minutes ago, but you're not insulting the grief, or because you said you guys have a good time and you laugh about it. It's
Yeah,
not You're not doing it in a bad way. You're doing it in a good way because once you become a grief coach and you learn how to grieve properly and you're able to teach the classes and stuff like that, then it's easy for us to understand grief, and then we can have that pleasure in embracing grief so that even if we do laugh with it, it's not in a mean way, it's in a good way. And
oh,
that's
absolutely.
the way that we want people to see grief, to find that so that you're not stuck in that dark hole, that you can come out and you can talk about your friends. Because I
Mhm.
think it's important that we do talk about our children or our loved ones or our friends, no matter how they die. It's okay to talk about them. And we're all
Mhm.
going to remember funny stories of things we did with people. And that's what's going to make you smile or laugh, you know?
Yeah, well, exactly. I've my closest friend from college died a few just a few months before COVID
Hmm.
started, and he'd been sick for a while, and we were we dated in college, and then he came out as gay, and but we were stayed like best friends, kind of. And his death hit me
Hmm.
really hard. And I went to one of his two memorial services because one memorial service was not enough. Um, they had to do, and so I went to his memorial service, and I was the person there who had known him the longest, and no one there had known him as long as I had. Not his partner, not the people he used to work with, not his neighbor, no one. And they had a slideshow, and there were pictures of him from when we were in college, but no one knew what the pictures meant. And so I would tell everybody what the pictures meant. Oh yeah, that's when he was dancing in this recital, and he wasn't supposed to do it, and his picture wound up on the front page of the student newspaper, and he got in trouble. And they're like, "What? He was a dancer?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, didn't you know?" And I was like, I didn't realize they knew nothing about that part of his life. And so I was able to tell funny stories at the memorial service, even though I didn't really feel like laughing, but I was able to tell those stories. And that was 6 weeks after he died. I don't know how I was able to do it, but it was you want to be able to get to that point. And the fact that I was able to do it 6 weeks later was a total shock to me. Um, Sometimes it takes years.
Yes.
Sometimes you
Yes.
may not ever be able to do it.
Right.
Um, but there's something healing about it,
Yes.
I think. Um, because the day after the memorial service, um, which was in Carmel, California, I went to Monterey for the day, and there was a classic car show and an oldies band. And the band said, one of the guys in the band said, "Okay, we're going to play an oldies song that's 75 years old." I'm like, I thought you were a rock and roll band. And they started playing In the Mood. And that was one of the songs that David and I always danced to because we used to swing dance when we were
Oh,
in college.
really?
And when the music started, I swear, I heard his voice behind me saying, "Well, come on," because that's what he'd say. That's what he'd say if I was not already out on the dance floor.
Oh,
I heard his voice so loud, I turned around and he wasn't there, of course, but I was like, "Oh my God, you're here."
yeah. He
And
was there.
and
Even if,
it was not upsetting to me at all.
no.
You know, it was like my first thought was, "Oh, calm down, I'll get out there," you know. And it was very, it's a word, comforting, I think.
Yes, yes. Because his presence, his spirit was there with you.
Yeah,
And he was,
yeah.
in a sense, he was encouraging you. So, I mean, to hear his voice, you knew he was there. And that
And
he
it was outside and it was noisy. It was on the pier, and I heard his voice as clear as could be.
right.
So,
Yeah,
and I was glad of it. I
I
was
do,
glad.
I do remember some people, some people hear it, some people see them. I see my loved ones more in a dream. And
Mm,
I can remember a dream of my son after he passed away.
mm,
It was such a clear, clean picture of him, except not being sick and with a ventilator or anything like that. It was
mm,
him being in a normal, natural body, built, and he had the most beautiful smile on his face.
mm,
And I knew he was. That's it was. I think it was at that point I knew he was okay, and I knew he was in
mhm,
a safe place. You know what I'm
mhm,
saying? But the what? But I still dream of him. That was the only dream I had of Timothy as being a man, a healthy
mhm.
man. All the other dreams I dream of him, if for some unknown reason, it's when he's a toddler. I don't know why. Every dream I have of him is of Timothy being a toddler, not being
Wow.
because he was 25 years old when he died. So it's like
Mm,
I don't know why my brain always goes back to the files of him as a toddler and not Tim as a man. But the other thing that I get that really makes me smile a lot. My mother was a very playful, joyful person. One of those people that
mhm,
that if you were to a party with, you have would have fun.
yeah,
You know, and I remember a couple years ago, I dreamt of my mother, and I don't remember if it was around her birthday or her angel
mhm,
anniversary, but I will never forget this dream of her. It was really weird. It was my mom that I knew her as in 1971 as my mom, but here it was now in the, I think it was either in the 1990 something or in the early 20 something,
mhm.
and she was going through, we were at a mall, she was going through every store, but she was happy and joyful and excited. And then suddenly she got to one store that for some reason wasn't really a store, it was like a church, and they were having like a prayer, and she just got in and she prayed with them and she sang with them, and then she went out and continued her shopping. And she couldn't believe the prices of candy because you remember candy used to be 5 or 10 cents, and now they're a dollar something. And the same thing with clothes. She couldn't believe how the church had the clothes style change, and um, I remember my in the dream, my sisters went to the car and they kept saying, "Come on, let's go, let's go," and she didn't want to leave the shopping place. And it was just it's I will never forget that one dream of her because
Mhm.
that was what brings comfort to me to know that she's
Mhm.
like Tim in a sense,
Oh, absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that she's happy, very, very happy. Even if she doesn't believe the cost of stuff nowadays, you know,
Mhm.
but she didn't realize that she's been dead and that it's been over 30, 40 years. And that's why she didn't understand, she didn't
Mhm.
see that. Where have I been all these years? Why don't I see this? And it was like, because you've
Yeah.
been dead, you've
I
been
I
gone.
think I think all those signs are very comforting, and a number of the people that I've interviewed over time have talked about how they felt their friend's presence in
Yeah,
some way. And sometimes it was their voice, or maybe they dreamed about them, or maybe it was just this sense that they were there, that
yeah.
they were close by, and it didn't make them feel sad. It was very it was comforting. I mean, that's really the only word for it. It made them feel like they were still close to them and guiding them in some way.
So or when we hear or read the stories that you've written, we have to also understand that's the same kind of stories that we hear of our own loved ones and friends who have passed away.
Mhm.
Everybody has a story. Doesn't mean if they're
Mhm.
gone or not.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And it may not always be in a book or recorded or anything, but they can sit down and write their story. Write your story because everybody has a story. So now I have a question for you and maybe even a challenge for you. You've been really good writing stories about friends who passed away and what in different time zone, um, like the 9/11, the AIDS, and then on. So, are we gonna hear your story?
Well, um, the first three books in the Friend Grief series were very personal to me
Okay,
because the first one I talked about my friend Dell, who was the reason I wrote the books in the first place. In the second one, I talked a little about my experience in the AIDS community. And then the third one about 9/11 was about finding out that one of my high school classmates had died that day. The last three books I did not have a personal connection to. Um, so I felt like it kind of balanced out. I didn't have to talk about myself, right? But when I sent the book about straight women in the AIDS community to my editor, I said, listen, we can cut the first chapter. And he said, why would I want to cut the first chapter? I said, because the first chapter is about me, it's about my experiences. And he said, not only are we not going to cut that chapter, you need to dig deeper. I was like, I'm not digging deeper. He's like, you need to dig deeper.
so he saw more into that chapter.
And I didn't want to do it. I did not want to do it. And I only wrote that chapter in the first place because he told me to. And I had to dig deeper, and that was not easy
Mm,
because I wrote things that I had never told anybody.
okay,
And that I still don't talk about a lot, but they're there if anybody wants to read them. Um, but it was very hard. It was very hard because I thought I was being magnanimous and saying, this is not about me. This is about the women in the book. But I was one of the women in the book.
yes.
And so I had to be in there.
Well, Victoria, I really thought this was really a wonderful.
This has been wonderful.
This
Yeah.
has been good, and I look forward to being able to get your books and read through them myself. and I hope others are going to feel the same way. And I look forward to hearing from you at the Global Grief Conference. You're only going to be at the one with Marty?
Right.
Okay. And so I think
I think it's on the 29th.
yeah,
I
I
think
think
ours,
hers is
yeah,
on the same day as mine.
yeah.
Because I interviewed her on last Friday, Marty McNabb. But it was a pleasure to have you here, and we had to close because they gave me a warning that we have to finish. And I'm like, there's too much to finish on. But I look forward to hearing more about you and I don't know if you're going to write more books, but at least learn more about you
I
in
don't either.
so maybe you can help me with my book. But anyway, um, I'm thankful that you are here with us, that you came, and I want to invite you back in and do it again, maybe this summer or this next fall, and
That
hear
would be
more
great.
from you and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And because I think it's amazing how all our stories, in a lot of ways, are similar, and we just don't realize it. So,
Mhm.
uh, this is this is Dee Bird with Unplugged Grief Ministries, and tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock we are having Savannah. No, I'm sorry, Sarah Jane Lyons. And if you lost an infant before or after birth, this was the person to come and listen to. I think this is the one she's doing it. Either that she's doing it to help grieving children. There's so many of them. I get some of them mixed up, but it's about children. So I want you to be able to come to that. I have 20 seconds left, so I want to just say thank you, Victoria, again for coming, and I hope everybody joins us tomorrow morning. If not, my friends are spoiled because they know I
Mhm.
am. Oh, it's just turned red, so that means I have to finish. Thank you for being here, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
All right, bye bye.